President's actual television broadcast was transmitted to the world at 10:30 p.m. EST, March 31. The Russians and Chinese were given 24 hours to get out of Fernando Po, or the skies over Santa Isabel would begin raining nuclear missiles.
This is darn serious,
the chief executive said.
And America will not shirk in its responsibility to the freedom-loving people of Fernando Po.
The broadcast concluded at 11 p.m. EST, and within 2 minutes, people attempting to get reservations on trains, planes, buses, or carpools to Canada had virtually every telephone wire in the country overloaded. In Moscow, where it was 10 the next morning, the Premier called a conference and said crisply,
"That character in Washington is a mental lunatic, and he means it. Get our men out of Fernando Po right away, then find out who authorized sending them in there in the first place and transfer him to be supervisor of a hydroelectric works in Outer Mongolia. We don't have any men in Fernando Po. The Americans are imagining things again." "Well, how the hell can we withdraw our men if we don't have them there in the first place?"
the Premier demanded.
"I don't know. We've got 24 hours to figure that out, or..."
The Commissar quoted an old Russian proverb which means, roughly, that when the polar bear excrement interferes with the fan belts, the machinery overheats.
"Suppose we just announce that our troops are coming out,"
another Commissar suggested.
"They can't say we're lying if they don't find any of our troops there afterward." "No, they never believe anything we say. They want to be shown,"
the Premier said thoughtfully.
"We will have to infiltrate some troops surreptitiously and then withdraw them with a lot of fanfare and publicity. That should do it." "I'm afraid it won't end the problem,"
another Commissar said funereally.
"Our intelligence indicates that there are Chinese troops there. Unless Peking backs down, we're going to be caught in the middle when the bombs start flying and..."
He quoted a proverb about the man in the intersection when two manure trucks collide.
"Damn,"
the Premier said.
"What the blue blazes do the Chinese want with Fernando Po?"
He was harassed, but still he spoke with authority. He was, in fact, characteristic of the best type of dominant male in the world at this time. He was 55 years old, tough, shrewd, unburdened by the complicated ethical ambiguities which puzzle intellectuals, and had long ago decided that the world was a mean son of a bitch, in which only the most cunning and ruthless can survive. He was also as kind as was possible for one holding that ultra-Darwinian philosophy, and he genuinely loved children and dogs, unless they were on the site of something that had to be bombed in the national interest. He still retained some sense of humour, despite the burdens of his almost godly office. And although he had been impotent with his wife for nearly 10 years now, he generally achieved orgasm in the mouth of a skilled prostitute within 1.5 minutes. He took amphetamine pep pills to keep going on his grueling 20-hour day, with the result that his vision of the world was somewhat skewed in a paranoid direction, and he took tranquilizers to keep from worrying too much, with the result that his detachment sometimes bordered on schizophrenia. But most of the time, his innate shrewdness gave him a fingernail grip on reality. In short, he was much like the rulers of America and China. 0005 was summoned to meet W in the headquarters of a certain branch of British intelligence. The date was March the 17th, but being English, neither 0005 nor W gave a thought to blessed St. Patrick. Instead, they spoke of Fernando Po.
"The Yanks,"
W said crisply,
"are developing evidence that the Russians or the Chinese, or both of them, are behind this tequila in motto swine. Of course, even if that were true, it wouldn't matter a damn to Her Majesty's government. What do we care if a speck of an island that size turns red? But you know the Yanks, 00005. They're ready to go to war over it, although they haven't announced that publicly yet."
"My mission?"
0005 asked, the fault lines of cruelty about his mouth turning into a most engaging smile.
is to hop down to Fernando Poo and find out the real politics of this tequila-motor bloke, and if he is red, overthrow him before the Yanks blow up the world.
That's the assignment. We can't have a bloody nuclear war just when the balance of payments is almost straightened out and the common market is finally starting to work. So, hop to it straight away. Naturally, if you're captured, Her Majesty's government will have to disavow any knowledge of your actions.
It always seems to work out that way.
0005 said ironically.
I wish for once you'd give me a mission where Her Majesty's bleeding government would stand behind me in a tight spot.
But 0005, of course, was merely being witty. As a loyal subject, he would follow orders under any circumstances, even if it required the death of every soul on Fernando Poo, and himself as well. He rose in his characteristically debonair fashion and headed for his own office, where he began his preparations for the Fernando Poo mission. His first step was to check his personal worldwide travel notebook, seeking the bar in Santa Isabel, which came closest to serving a suitable martini, and the restaurant most likely to prepare an endurable lobster Newburg. To his horror, there was no such bar and no such restaurant. Santa Isabel was bereft of social graces.
I say,
00005 muttered.
This is going to be a bit thick.
But he cheered up quickly, for he knew that Fernando Poo would be equipped at least with a bevy of tawny-skinned or coffee-coloured females, and such women were the holy grail to him. Besides, he had already formed his own theory about Fernando Poo. He was convinced that bugger, blowhards, unreformed gangsters, goons, and espionage renegades, an international conspiracy of criminals and double agents, led by the infamous and mysterious Eric the Red Blowhard, was behind it all. 00005 had never heard of the Illuminati. In fact, 00005, despite his dark hair, combed straight back, his piercing eyes, his cruel and handsome face, his trim athlete's body, and his capacity to penetrate any number of females and defenestrate any number of males in the course of duty, was not really an ideal intelligence agent. He had grown up reading Ian Fleming novels, and one day, at the age of 21, looked in the mirror, decided he was everything a Fleming hero should be, and started a campaign to get into the spy game. After 14 years in bureaucratic burrowing, he finally arrived in one of the intelligence services, but it was much more the kind of squalid and bumbling organisation in which Harry Palmer had toiled his cynical days away than it was a birth of bondage. Nevertheless, 00005 did his best to refurbish and glamorise the scene, and, perhaps because God looks after fools, he hadn't managed to get himself killed in any of the increasingly bizarre missions to which he was assigned. The missions were all weird at first because nobody took them seriously. They were all based on wild rumours that had to be checked out just in case there'd be some truth in them. But later it was realised that 00005's peculiar schizophrenia was well suited to certain real problems, just as the schizoid of the more withdrawn type is ideal for a sleeper agent, since he could easily forget what was conventionally considered his real self. Of course, nobody at any time ever took bugger seriously, and behind his back, 00005's obsession with this organisation was a subject of much interdepartmental humour.
Of cryogenics, complete control, but who'd expect the military intelligence? 2 words combined that can't make sense. Possibly
It is our duty, our sacred duty, to defend Fernando Poo.
Atlanta Hope was telling a cheering crowd in Cincinnati that very day.
Are we to wait until the godless Reds are right here in Cincinnati?
The crowd started to scream their unwillingness to wait that long. They had been expecting the godless Reds to arrive in Cincinnati since about 1945 and were by now convinced that the dirty cowards were never going to come and would have to be met on their own turf. But a group of dirty, long-haired, freaky-looking students from Antioch College began to chant, "I don't want to die for Fernando Poo." The crowd turned in fury. At last, some real Reds to fight. 7 ambulances and 30 police cars were soon racing to the scene. But only 5 years earlier, Atlanta had a different message. When God's Lightning was first founded as a splinter off women's liberation, it had as its slogan, "No more sexism." And its original targets were adult bookstores, sex education programs, men's magazines, and foreign movies. It was only after meeting smiling Jim Trepomena of Knights of Christianity United in Faith that Atlanta discovered that both male supremacy and orgasms were part of the international communist conspiracy. It was at that point, really, that God's Lightning and Orthodox Women's Lib totally parted company. For the Orthodox faction just then were teaching that male supremacy and orgasms were part of the international capitalist conspiracy.
Fernando Poo,
The President of the United States told reporters, even as Atlanta was calling for all-out war,
will not become another Laos or another Costa Rica.
When are we going to get our troops out of Laos?
a reporter from the New York Times asked quickly. But a man from the Washington Post asked just as rapidly,
And when are we going to get our troops out of Costa Rica? Our present plans for withdrawal are going forward according to an orderly schedule.
the President began. But in Santa Isabel itself, as Tequila Remota underlined a passage in Machiavelli, 0005 concluded a shortwave broadcast to a British submarine lying 17 miles off the coast of the island.
The Yanks have gone absolutely bonkers, I'm afraid. I've been here 9 days now, and I'm absolutely convinced there is not one Russian or Chinese agent in any way involved in Generalissimo Tequila Imota, nor are there any troops of either of those governments hiding anywhere in the jungles. However, Bugger is definitely running a heroin smuggling ring here, and I would like permission to investigate that.
The permission was to be denied. Old W, back at Intelligence HQ in London, knew that 0005 was a bit bonkers about Bugger himself, and imagined that it was involved in every mission he undertook. At the same time, in a different hotel, Tobias Knight, on special loan from the FBI to the CIA, concluded his nightly shortwave broadcast to an American submarine 23 miles off the coast.
The Russian troops are definitely engaged in building what can only be a rocket launching site, and the slants are constructing what seems to be a nuclear installation.
And Hagbard Chalene, lying 40 miles out in the Bight of Biafra in the Leif Erikson, intercepted both messages and smiled cynically and wired P in New York. Activate Malik and prepare Dawn.